Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey everybody, coming at you live, not live, this is pre-recorded podcast, but it's snowing outside.
Stumbled right Allegate.
Yeah,
we are live, none of this is edited.
Yeah.
We take out
In a sense, yeah. I mean, for the four of us, or the five of us, it's live.
It's very live right now
that's,
in the moment.
That's something.
Yeah, it's snowy at my house, and it's about to be snowy real again. Muddy. Yeah, it's, I don't know how to feel about it. I'm trying to stay positive, but it is it is still winter.
I don't like mud season. We're deep within mud season right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
It feels early for mud season too, but here we are.
We are. The ground is unfrozen at this point. It's a slushy snow here in Kentucky at the time of this recording, and I don't know. I have mixed feelings about slushy snow. It's one of my least favorite. It gets gray on the road and kind of slops around everywhere. So there's not much there's not much fun about it. No.
Isn't there that Noah Kahan song? That's the season of the mud or something like that.
That is it. Yes.
That's
Mud
him.
Sticks, he does have one of those.
Oh, stick. I get stick in mud
stick
confused.
Season is
stick
what you're
season,
thinking of. Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Same.
Well, okay.
You make things out of both of them put together. So it's
the wonderful time of the year.
Yes, the most mud.
No,
We're reaching now.
Okay, I think I might be glitching.
Absolutely
My brain might.
And
be.
I just want to point out that we're 30 seconds in and we have not talked about food yet. I hope some of you constant listeners are impressed.
I wasn't sure if we should bring it up while we talked about mud or how exactly I was working on my segue for that. But
okay. So you were working on something though, not a surprise.
Well, it had to do with cheese. I'm sure all of you are shocked.
Of course.
Makes sense.
Well, I was gonna.
Perfect sense.
If we're talking about mud, does anybody here a fan of a dirt cup, a dessert?
Of
vibe?
Course.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course. Okay.
My husband and I used to do a kids plant camp, and our favorite thing to do was at the end of the day, we had them make dirt cups and learn about soil layers, and then we send them home with all the sugar. And we were like, "Yeah, thanks for sending your child. They're sugared up now. Bye.
See you later."
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that might be.
We thought they were worn out from being outside all day in the sun and everything. We loaded them up with sugar and sent them on their way.
Which called the fallout effect.
Our guest knows a little bit about sugary products, I should say. Maybe, how was that segue?
Yeah.
Well, there's also insects in dirt cups, and that's kind of like...
is that where you were going with that?
I don't know.
And before we jump right in, I want to know everybody's favorite honey recipe, because we have Beekeepers meetings coming up, and we're always trying to come up with things. And I know Amanda, Kentucky State Apiarist, Amanda Skidmore is with us today. But I know, Amanda, you've got some good recipes for honey.
Yeah, actually I get to help with the state fair and all the recipes that get submitted to the state fair for the cookery contest. The folks behind the scenes get to kind of preview and test on our own. So
we have secret stuff, like secret recipes even, man.
A little bit. Yeah, you can kind of tell the ones that got pulled from the internet and then the ones that have been worked on for a while. Yeah. I believe the lady who won the sweepstakes last year, she submitted into 19 different categories.
Wow.
And she had all kinds of things from a honey almond cake, and you could tell that she was this amazing grandma cook. Everything she had was just amazing. But honey almond cake, she had honey breads, baklava, all sorts of delicious honey related things.
I do love a good honey cake. That's one of my absolute favorites. That's a traditional with my family growing up in the eastern part of the state. And it was made with buttermilk. Our honey cake was made with walnuts, buttermilk, and of course all the flour and all the other typical cake things, but absolutely love it. A good honey cake is hard to beat. Honey and nut cake, I guess, technically, if you want to, be specific about it, but good stuff. Yeah.
Alexis and I have a little experience with judging some cakes and stuff at one point in our lives. We did it once, and we thought we could. Again. Yeah, we want to do it again. We thought we could taste test everything, and it was a bad decision by the end of it.
You
What
What do
mean
you
like
mean?
it was
Like it?
at the state fair? Like we're judging like multiple things and try to take a bite of each?
We became impromptu judges at a smaller county fair once when other judges did not show up for the culinary section. And of course, we were thrilled about it. And we were like, oh, we got this. And I just remember like, Alexis started on one end of the table, I started on the other. And by the time we met each other in the middle, we were like, I think I'm going to be sick. And then, you know, we tried everything. And, you know, they were like, you didn't have to try everything, but we did.
We're like,
But
we
how
finished
else are
bottom.
you
Yeah.
supposed to
Well, you
judge it?
gotta
How are you supposed to
use
know?
the spit bucket. That's what it's there for.
Yeah. When
it's
you taste when you judge honey and you taste the honey, you have to taste all of them, and most of the time people submit multiple jars. So yeah, the people who are doing the honey tasting and judging usually end up pretty buzzed by the end of the day
Yeah.
because they just
I
have
would
so much
imagine.
You did that.
Yeah.
Sugar rush.
sugar.
See what you did there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, the state fair, I forget that there's, I mean, that's the long-standing tradition here in Kentucky, all of the activities related to honey. I mean, it's like the big show for honey in the state of Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a bees and honey room that's an educational space, but also where all the competition things are going in. So we really are excited about it. This year we've entered a few new categories. So as soon as the premium book comes out, we're excited. We included things like quilts this year and poetry. We took feedback from a lot of people to kind of mix it up. So it's going to be very
cool.
bee focused.
I like that.
Well,
Artsy.
that's just one tiny part of your job, which sometimes I think people don't realize that is part of your job to, you know,
Yes.
being at the state fair. But do you care just to like share a little bit like your general overview of your position, and before we kind of talk more about, you know, some of the specialized things that you do and offer in the state?
Sure. Kind of just big picture. I am here to help beekeepers keep their bees healthy. I kind of cover everything from when you put your bees into the hive until you take products and bees out of the hive. I work with doing the certified health inspections. So if there's a potential pesticide exposure or a person that needs to move hives out of the state and the state they're moving to requires a health inspection before the bees arrive, I help with that. I'm involved with the statewide pollinator protection plan, which is kind of a guidebook for how to protect pollinators in Kentucky. And I also participate in different research trials and help beekeepers when they call or go do site visits. And I cover all 120 counties, so you never know where I'm going to be.
That is a big territory. So is it fair to say, I guess, in your position as a state apiarist here in Kentucky, are you both education and regulation kind of then? Do you do kind of both? Yeah.
Yes.
It sounded like you did. Yeah. And
it's
you
a
work
combination.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. It covers a lot of ground, though. And I know that you were telling us earlier, there are a lot of beekeeping clubs in Kentucky. And I'm sure you knew that before you took this position because sounds like a beekeeper before you of course, came into this position. But yeah, a lot of beekeeping clubs in the state from what it sounds like.
Yeah, we have 72 different individual clubs across the state. So just about anywhere someone's located, they can get to a bee club pretty easily. The information for finding bee clubs is on the Kentucky State Beekeepers Association website. They have the links to all the local clubs. So they're kind of the statewide umbrella organization. And some clubs are members of the state organization, and then some clubs are independent, but we list all of them on that website. So no matter where you're at, you're able to see where clubs are meeting. And if you want to join a club and hang out with beekeepers.
Yeah, I know that's one of the things you guys do is it's probably a job in itself to keep all that updated. Is that what you guys encourage people to do, to kind of self-update that when there's been a change in like officers or meeting patterns, or do you reach out to people? How does that work? Trying to keep all that updated.
Yeah, so it is kind of a massive list to update, and it kind of goes both ways. If a new club comes together or new officers come into place, we encourage them to reach out to me, and I will update the list accordingly. And then if I haven't heard from a club for a while, I start making phone calls and tracing down who's in charge and helping to keep that list as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I have a
that's
question,
something else.
Amanda. How did you get here? Because like a lot of people don't even know what a state apiarist is, let alone like become this and get to do this really cool job. So like tell me your story, Amanda.
How far back in time do you want to go?
At a very young age.
Well, I
just
remember sitting
whatever
in
you wanna
class
tell
with
us.
you at some point. So
I say we can go earlier than that. So
I remember playing squash with you for hours on end. So
that grad school.
I did not realize you guys had all this history with Amanda. So
Yeah.
you guys go way back. Yeah.
So I grew up in Lexington, and when I was in high school, I was in an art class, and I am not an artsy person at all, as Alexis and Jessica can probably tell you. But the art teacher at the end of the semester, she looked at me and she was like, "You really need to find something better to do with your life because it's not art."
I
which was kind of
appreciate
harsh. Yeah, which a little bit harsh.
Love, right? I guess.
Yeah. But her husband was a professor in the UK entomology department, and she suggested that I intern with him over the summer to get some high school credits. And so I had the opportunity to kind of start learning about insects and how they interacted with the world. And then as I got into undergrad at UK, I was involved in both the entomology and sustainable agriculture programs, which is where I met Alexis. And kind of saw the connection between insects and how our food is grown, both from the pest side, where insects kind of attack our crops, and then also from the pollinator side, where they're important for pollination aspects or they're natural enemies, predators of those pests. And how those interactions work really intrigued me. So I stayed at UK for my PhD, which is where I hung out with Jessica. And we looked at the integrated pest management in specialty crops in Kentucky, and it also overlapped with pollinator health, because whenever you're, working pest management in a food system, you've got pollinators right there. So looked at that, and then I wrapped up at UK, did a postdoc at Purdue for a couple years, and I had the opportunity to go to New Mexico State University to work as their integrated pest management specialist for small and urban farms across the entire state of New Mexico. So I was there. We worked on all kinds of different specialty crops, as well as developing pollinator related resources. New Mexico has over 1,000 species of native bees. And so there was a lot of work that had been done with the native bees, and that led to a lot of questions about honeybees and how they interacted in the desert climate, and could that be a possible avenue for agriculture producers to look at, or what were the interactions between native bees and honeybees. So that's kind of where a lot of the honeybee related work came in. After that kind of all happened around COVID. And so really drove me wanting to come back towards Kentucky. So Morehead State had an opportunity for me to come and be a professor in their Department of Agriculture. So I taught college classes for a couple years before going into some grant writing. And then I was friends with Tammy Potter before she retired, and she was the former state apiarist. So when I heard that she had retired from the position, I thought that it was a really cool job. I've told her for years how cool I thought her position was, and I had the opportunity to apply for it. And kind of all of those experiences led to being able to step into this position. So it's kind of a long, loopy story.
Yeah, so you've been in other geographies even, I mean, well beyond Kentucky, it sounds like, and worked a lot in honeybee health, which I guess, was great background experience to support your current role, because that's a big deal in Kentucky. I'm sure that there are some problems with bees in Kentucky that have to be addressed, kind of health problems. So that sounds like that's a great support experience.
Yeah.
All of those experiences. It's awesome. Very cool.
I have a fun fact that made me feel really old. When I was in the county, we had our county ag agent retired, and we got a new ag agent. And he came in young and fresh, just graduated, and he told me that Amanda was his professor in college.
Yes.
And I became
did a little piece
a
of you
million
die,
years old.
just a small piece.
And he was like, she said to tell you hi. And I was like, excuse me, what? I just graduated college. I'm not really sure how she's a professor, but that's the way it felt. But he had all wonderful things to say. So
Alexis, you were born in the 1900s. Okay.
I was born in the 1900s.
In the 1900s.
Yes,
that's right. Time does pass quickly. It does.
When Amanda was sharing some of her past, it started making me think about different projects and unique things other than, I know we're here to talk about honeybees and State Apiarist stuff, but like with your IPM stuff with the squash bees and those unique bees we were looking at, and using little tiny vacuums, which may sound weird to people, but we were going out and vacuuming these adorable little squash bees, up from the flowers and putting them in the cooler, not to kill them or anything, but just to like count and look at them before releasing. And just another little pollinator that people don't think about, right? That plays a big role in the grand scheme of things.
How big are bee vacuums? I need to know, I need a better mental image.
They're the little dirt devils, like what you had in the 90s that were like the little tiny, like clean your steps with dirt devils. And then they chop them in half and add a container to them and a long plastic tube so that you can kind of stick that tube down into the flower, turn the shop vac on, or the little handheld shop vac on, and suck the bees into the container.
Bees in a bottle. It's a whole.
Can you imagine how disorienting of an experience that would be?
The bees like, whoa, what kind of pollen did I just get into?
Like wind, there's this weird wind that I've never experienced before.
That is wild. Yeah.
Well, and it's as much of a vortex as it creates, it doesn't hurt them to do that. So like Jessica said, we can vacuum them up. They're in a sealed container. We can put them in a cooler so that they don't overheat, study them, and then be able to re-release them.
Yeah, technically meeting a clown as a child didn't hurt me, but I remember the experience. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I'm sure it was memorable.
Yeah, I've always been amazed. Like, when I first started catching swarm, I've been a beekeeper in the past. I'm a washed up beekeeper now, but I was always amazed at how kind of resilient bees are, because the first swarm I caught, I think I shot with a shotgun because the limb was too high. So I took a 12 gauge and shot the limb out of the tree. The swarm hit the ground out of a tulip poplar. And I was like, wow, I've really just shredded everything in here, because there's no other way to get it. Threw it I kept a, deep high buddy in the back of the truck and just took my staple gun, stapled down the screen wire and got it home, and it was fine. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And I actually got the queen. They're pretty resilient.
Amanda, you may not know, but our listeners know that the novel Huckleberry Finn was loosely based on Ray's childhood.
I like it.
So he has lots of folksy.
I did not grow up around a river, though.
So. Incredible.
He might actually be Huckleberry Finn from
That's
the
true.
1800s.
There you go.
Well, so you mentioned, I think honeybees get a lot of visibility, and a lot of people are thinking about them. There's sort of them and the monarchs as this elevated class of pollinators. But you said the PPP, the Pollinator Protection Program, and some other stuff that you're working on, and you said the native bee stuff that you had done in the past. I'm just kind of curious. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some things that people don't necessarily realize about honeybees as far as their non-native status, and like what's as far as numbers of species, numbers of insect populations, etc. Like how many native bees are there compared to honeybees? Where are the honeybees from? Any of this stuff. I think that stuff's really cool.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just big overview. Honeybees were introduced to the United States by colonists who first came over. So the first Jamestown colony has records of having bees brought to it. Before that, in North America, we didn't have any Apis mellifera, which is the honeybee genus and species. Several million years ago, we did have an Apis genus bee in the North American continent, but it became extinct, so it had not been here. However, we have about 4,000 native species of pollinators, or bee pollinators, in North America. In Kentucky specifically, we estimate that we have between 450 and 500 unique species of bees. Let's see, what group is it? One of the groups right now, Department of Nature Preserves, is currently going through and checking records and doing an active study on native pollinators to determine how many native bees we actually have on record in Kentucky. So that's going to be some cool information here coming out hopefully pretty soon. But it's a really interesting question because it's one that we don't have an exact number for, just an estimate.
So as a noob here, that what you're telling me is for honeybees, when we think of honeybees, traditional people keep them in hives, that's one species.
Correct. Yep.
And there's 400 other species of native honeybees estimated in Kentucky, and maybe 4,000.
So they would not be considered honeybees. When you're thinking about it, think about it like breeds of dogs. So like bumblebees would still be considered a bee. The little black sweat bees that get you when you're outside sweating, those are a type of bee. Those shiny green halictid bees, those are all of the different kinds of bees that are closely related to a honeybee, but are not in that same genus and species.
So it would be almost like when we think about the honeybee as a bee, that would be like saying a robin that's birds. Birds are, but think about all the different kinds of birds we have compared to that. I mean, that it's pretty crazy. And I think as far as just messaging out to the public and what people think about bees and in terms of this relationship with honey, it's one of those I think it sometimes surprises people to hear, wow, there's hundreds of other species.
Well, and importantly to know, honeybees have a caste system, right? They've got a colony with a queen. The workers are all female. And then they have drones that are only around for a certain time of year, but they all live in one big colony and they work as a unit together. Most of the other native bees that we have are solitary. So they either dig an individual nest in the ground, or have nests in trees or twigs, grasses. So it's not like they work as a colony. They're all individual. So when you start talking about pollinators and pollinator protection and bee habitats, it's very diverse. And so we have to take a lot of different approaches to look at it.
What might be some of those approaches?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about protecting our native pollinators, we're looking at things like don't move the leaves, or if you've seen the campaign, leave the leaves in the wintertime. A lot of times our native pollinators will overwinter in that kind of protected material, either in the soil underneath of that. Sometimes they're in like the stems of grasses. And so we want to try to be careful not to disrupt that life cycle. So that's one thing that we would do with native pollinators, whereas honeybees live in a colony that we can prepare for winter. We work with and interact with much more closely. So it's at the USDA level, the USDA recognizes honeybees as a form of livestock. At the state level, Kentucky has never recognized bees as a form of livestock for several different reasons. But when you're thinking about it, honeybees would be considered a managed pollinator. We as humans are managing them and manipulating their living conditions, the size of their population, how they access, growth. We do artificial insemination and breeding and really interact with them much more like livestock than we would a native species of animal, or even wild.
It's really fascinating. I mean, the breeding over the years, talk about the hygienic bees or the the weaver bees or whatever, all the different breeding that's went into that for different characteristics. I mean, what are the major types now that you're seeing out? I mean, we're all used to like little 3-banded Italian or whatever, the super common chill representative of bees everywhere. But I mean, what types of bees do you see as far as honeybees go in the state? What are the most common things that you see? I'm always curious about that.
Yeah, so what Ray is talking about is just like with any species of animal that we have a breeding program for, there would be different strains or different lines of bees. So there's Russians, there's Italians, there's Germans, and a lot of that ties back to where that original genetic material came from. When it gets worked on. So there's a huge mix of that. And depending on who you talk to, there's going to be preferences for one or the other type of bee. However, they all, on average, tend to perform the same types of behaviors. And so it's really hard to pin down and say this is like the best one, or along those lines, because even in like microhabitats they can perform differently, just slightly. So
it was fascinating.
Hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, it's really hard. And depending on like the apiarist I've worked with a lot over the years, Phil Kraft and Rob Mountain, and a lot of the ones going way back, even before Tammy. But Rob was a fascinating. He was an apiarist in the past, but he was a South African beekeeper, and to hear him talk about keeping bees in South Africa, because I guess people still have a certain reaction when they hear South African bees, because their aggression levels and their proximity alert that goes off is far greater than bees that we're typically working with. But yeah, even bees in other parts of the world are fascinating to me. But he opened my eyes to like people actually do, make honey from bees, even in that part of the world where that's a type of bee that maybe has different behaviors than what we're used to. But it's just so fascinating.
Yes, so we have Apis mellifera here, but there are other Apis species. I believe there's 7 known Apis species total. So different parts of the world have other types of honeybees, like the giant Asian honeybee, which is Apis dorsata, which is over in Southeast Asia, that has open comb that just hangs off tree branches or buildings, and the colony lives on that instead of being inside of a structure like what Apis mellifera, which is the Western honeybee or European honeybee, it's got a lot of common names, prefers, but what we would typically think of as a honeybee.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you
go ahead, Jessica.
I'm so glad you mentioned about like them being like tiny livestock, right? Because I think there are lots of misconceptions for people out there who are new to the bee world or love the idea of having bees, right? And so they think like, I can get a hive of bees and I can sit them out there and they'll do their thing and I'll get honey, and then they'll magically survive the winter and I won't have to treat for mites and all of those other things, right? And I know with your position, like with us, with our extension stuff, you do a lot of outreach of educating, and I assume you probably have gotten some like interesting questions over the years through that, or want to share any of those interesting things you may have heard, or like any projects you're currently like working on with some of the beekeepers with those things that I think people just don't think about, like, because they are little livestock and you do have to take care of them and feed them and water them and all the things, right?
All the things, yeah.
And they're very expensive.
They are very expensive. That's one of the things when I have a beekeeping like 101 class that I do. So I have kind of just an introduction to bees that I've worked with a couple different extension agents to do in their counties. And it's mostly a summary of what beekeeping is. It's definitely not as intense as going to a bee school, which I would highly recommend to anyone who is interested in getting into bees to actually go to like a formal bee school. You can just Google bee school and it will come up with like all these options. But a lot of what I do in those 101 classes is talk people out of getting bees. for some of the reasons that Jessica just mentioned, a lot of people come into bees with the misconception that raising honeybees will help pollinators, because they hear about pollinator decline and they're very concerned that we're losing pollinators. But there's that misconception that honeybees serve in the same roles that our native pollinators do. So oftentimes we encourage folks who want to help support pollinators to go down the line of developing pollinator habitat in their own yards, providing resources for all different kinds of bees to have support, and thinking about it from the perspective of if you're bringing a honeybee colony into a new location, you're all of a sudden bringing in, at peak season, 60 to 80,000 new mouths to feed that still need pollen and nectar and resources from flowers. So instead of helping the native pollinators in your area, what you're doing is you're bringing in bees, and if you just set them and leave them there and just let them go, that's not helping the situation. That's actually leading to them getting more diseases, spreading diseases to the native bee population, and can cause your neighbors who are beekeeping to see higher disease and pest pressure. So if you're not willing to invest in it and look at it as kind of a livestock operation where you are actively managing your colonies, then it can really have a negative environmental impact. If you're looking at it from a small business perspective, then we have the different management tools that we can use to make that more sustainable. And we have other options from looking at it as like a managed livestock, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of, I guess the key word there is management, and you have to know why you're getting into it.
So just to put a little bit of a finer point on that, and repeat basically what you said. So if someone cares about the environment, they care about pollinators, they want to do their part to offset this process of damage that's being done to pollinators and threats, etc., beekeeping would be way down the list of things that they could do. And as far as efficiency of the amount of money that they could spend to do other things instead, like planting stuff, like maybe even just not doing things, like not picking up some of the sticks and leaves and other things. Is that what I'm hearing from you? That
yes.
The beekeeping is sort of its own thing. It's like you wouldn't go out and buy cattle if you were interested in protecting local wildlife.
Exactly.
You would do other things instead.
This reminds me of that meme that have you guys seen where someone like points to their unmowed area by their stream or their lawn, and it's like, I don't mow this, I don't do this for the pollinators, but then they go down the list to like their laundry that's not folded and they go for the pollinators, and the dishes for the pollinators.
Yeah, I like the dishes, yes, for the pollinators.
Yep.
But it's sometimes it's the things you don't do which are really valuable.
Yeah. And remembering that getting into beekeeping is an investment. Mm-hmm. To really get started, first we encourage someone to attend a bee club and find a mentor. Kentucky actually has a really great beekeeping network that really focuses many of the clubs do, on mentorship. So going to a club, finding an established beekeeper that you can kind of shadow, and we really encourage you to consider doing this for up to a year so you can really work through the whole season. Some people don't realize until they're covered in 10,000 bees that's not a comfortable situation for them to be in.
You have to lift heavy things. I mean, beekeeping's heavy work. I mean,
so you really don't want to invest all of that money and time until you know if it's something you really would like to get involved in. And then we encourage people to start out with at least 3 colonies. That way, in a lot of cases when you're beekeeping, the bees make resources for themselves, but some colonies are better at that than others. So sometimes during the season, you're finding that you need to borrow resources from one colony and add it to another colony. So if you only have a single colony and it starts struggling and you don't have any of those resources, it can make it unsuccessful for you.
I made that mistake the first year, and if you have a single loss, you have a total loss.
Exactly.
And then I learned all about making nukes and the benefit of that 3 to 5 hives, because there's what's known as normal winter losses.
Yes.
You may lose some colonies through the winter, and that's a normal thing. So that is so critically important. And even though I'm a beginning beekeeper, I consider myself, I learned that, and I stress that to people thinking about getting into it, is if you can do it at all, make sure 3 to 5, just don't question it. If you can get into it with that number, you can make nukes and have some other strategies of stores and resources that you can share. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point.
And that, if you look at the cost breakdown, now UK has a really great extension guide that kind of breaks down the economics of beekeeping in Kentucky. So I'll point it back at you all to share that resource. But if you look at the cost to getting started, on average, for 3 colonies, it's going to be about $1,500. To get all of the bee veils and equipment and frames and hive boxes, and then the bees themselves. That's kind of like your starting cost to get into it. And then it just keeps going up from there.
Once you get started and you get into a local club and you start eating honey cakes, it just is this addiction. It can be, because it can be a lot of fun. I mean, we're describing beekeeping as a lot of work, and it definitely can be a lot of work.
But it's rewarding.
It's very rewarding, and it's just so unique, and just the history behind honey. I guess it goes all the way back to like Egyptian records. We find, like, and even before then. I mean, it's such an ancient. Is it the only shelf stable, like, natural food source that lasts that long? I mean, it's just, honey's pretty incredible. I mean, it is. Beekeeping is incredible, and honey itself as a product is pretty incredible.
Well, and it's also exciting too when your bees, you feel like you've worked with them and you've interacted with them, and a lot of people will talk with their bees and engage all throughout the season, so that by the time you get to where you can actually harvest some of your honey, or the first time you get to taste the honey that's coming out of your hives, any beekeeper will tell you that they've got the best honey, and it all comes into the work that they've put in, and the excitement around, working with their bees. So yes, there is a lot of work that goes into it to do it in a way that keeps your bees healthy, which I think is super important to remember, is that we want to be good stewards of the animals that we're working with, right? You wouldn't just leave a cow with a predator attacking it all the time. You would take steps to manage that predator. So just like with a larger livestock, things with bees, right, like varroa mites, you would take actions to treat that. So I think it's really important to remember that those are parts of this too.
Yeah. And that I think I want to talk to beekeepers before. They're just like, oh, well, they're, we want them to build immunity, or we want them to do all these things. And the reminder that they're not native species. So it's not exactly the same as, wanting a native plant is adapting to a drier soil. We brought this in, which leads me to probably a dumb question, but one I hadn't thought about until you mentioned that they came over in Jamestown. So are we saying there was probably not honey in the U.S. prior to Jamestown? Like, the native tribes were not harvesting honey out of a tree somewhere?
That's pretty incredible when you think about it. I mean, it's pretty incredible, yeah.
So it should have been.
I just never thought about it. Like,
so Jared Diamond, it should have been guns, germ steel, and honey also.
Well, and that's actually an interesting point. So these bees, right, traveled with folks as they moved from place to place. Some of them, right, swarm and escape out into the environment and get into things like bee trees, or have lived on their own. It's almost like dandelions at this point, right? Dandelions are not a native species, but they're here and they're not going to go anywhere. It's very similar with honeybees. We would say they're not a native species, but a little bit like dandelions, they've naturalized to North America. Yeah. So Kentucky actually has a couple really cool areas. One's over in Hazard, where we can have folks that have done genetic testing to show how their bees are related. And we have some folks that have like 70% matches to some of those original colonies that came over. And it's because of the unique geography of some of the hollers in Appalachia, that those bee populations, unless you were to bring bees in from the outside, those honeybees are going to the same mating areas. They're in that same zone. And so those genetics stay more true. So we have some Apis mellifera that we can point to and say these came over in the 1600s, and they moved with people, and that their genetics haven't been crossed because it's been such an isolated population for so long.
So I think, if maybe we hopefully have dissuaded some people who were going to get bees from doing it because it would have been a bad idea. And this is a horticulture podcast, though honey is considered a specialty crop by the USDA. A lot of the folks that we are coming to this, they're coming from the plant world. Yeah. And so if you had, and you've covered some of these already, but if you had to give top 3, 5, whatever things that people who are plant related, people who are concerned about pollinators, maybe they have bees, neighbors who have bees or something, that they want to do something besides leaving the leaves, maybe what other things might they think about doing as plant we call them true leaves. We trying to bring a cult vibe to the podcast.
Hort culture.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah. So what would be that kind of short list of things, or things maybe people wouldn't think of?
Yeah, so I think one of the thoughts is to have plants that are blooming year round. So for honeybees or native bees both, they need those food resources, right? The pollen and the nectar provide the sugars, proteins, carbs that the bees need to survive. So the more plants you can plant that would be blooming from March through November, the better. And we really encourage you to look for native plant species because those are going to match up with the native pollinator species more closely. Honeybees are considered a generalist pollinator. They'll kind of go to anything that has a good pollen and nectar reward. They'll avoid sunflowers.
Same, honestly.
Yeah. They'll avoid sunflowers that don't have a lot of nectar or a lot of pollen. But oftentimes what you'll see is if they find a good resource, this is why there's such a benefit as pollinators for things like apples or almonds. Once they find that really good food resource, they go back to their colony and they communicate it. Then the rest of the colony, or a portion of the rest of the colony, will come and they will work that particular flower species until they've utilized all of those resources and then move on to the next.
Is that what gives us like top different, now this is going to get into the weeds a little bit. I know, you know where I'm going with this. The different types of honey, is that what gives us that?
Yeah.
Like Lynn honey or black locust honey, or in East Kentucky, we even started getting autumn olive honey on the reclaimed strip mine areas, which is very unique. Is that how we get that then? They find something, they really just bring their friends and just, really work the area?
Yeah. So in big picture, yes. So bees, a colony is usually not going to pick just one food source. It's going to have lots of different food sources. So all of those different flavors are going to come into the hive. However, if we have a plant that is predominantly in bloom, we're going to see those flavors be the predominant ones. We can do DNA testing to show what the bees have, like exactly, which is really, really, really cool. And it's becoming more and more affordable. So a lot more beekeepers are doing it because everyone's curious, especially because from year to year, season to season, right? Your plant folks, not everything's going to bloom at the same time. Some things are going to have good years. Some things are going to have bad years.
Might rain when all the locusts are in bloom.
Yes,
right?
always exactly. The rain with the locust bloom. Yes.
Yep. So, in general, and this is just some big generalizations for Kentucky, early spring, we're mostly going to see things like black locust. That's going to be your really clear honeys. like the almost water white type clear honey.
It's really beautiful. Yeah. I think it is. It doesn't look like a honey, but it's really pretty when you get it. Yes.
Yep. And it's got more of a confectionery, powdered, sugary taste to it. And then as we move more into May, June, we're going to see more of that tulip poplar. And that's where you see that kind of amber color come in, a more flavorful honey. And then you'll have like wildflowers and everything else that starts to mix in throughout the summer. And then towards the end of the summer, usually in Kentucky, we have a practice of leaving fall honey for our bees because it's not a particularly productive season. At least for the past 5 to 6 years, it has not been a productive honey season, and our bees need those resources going into the winter. But you could potentially see goldenrod or kudzu honey towards the fall end because there's so much of that pollen and nectar available. And those have really unique tastes. And then there's some folks that target those tastes with like buckwheat, which almost has a sorghum-y. If you can get a predominantly buckwheat honey.
Yeah.
And some people really like that. I'm on the lighter end. I really like, if you go out to like Oregon, you can get raspberry honey, which is from raspberry flowers. I've had peach honey, which has come from like bees that were on peach orchards. And if you pull the honey frames out of the hive while your bees are at a particular location or particular part of the season, you can capture that better flavor profile wise versus if you let your honey go all summer and then you harvest at the end, you kind of just have a mix of everything.
I love all the flavors, and it's amazing. What you get.
It's so amazing and so cool. Our bee club at my office, they do an annual honey tasting event at the end of the season that they like bring a jar from their harvest, and it is amazing to see beekeepers who are neighbors who harvested around the same time, and the honey will taste completely different. Right? I mean, they're just a few miles down the road from each other, and just what their bees were bringing in at that time or where their bees chose to go, it'll have a very distinct, different flavor to it. So it's really, bees are just so cool, right?
Yeah, it's so cool. A fun story to tie into that, the idea of neighbors having honey that tastes differently. We had someone bring honey to the state fair that tasted like Elmer's glue.
Oh.
Right, we had to taste all this honey, and we could not figure out, like, one of their neighbors had also submitted samples, so afterwards we kind of talked to both of them because we can see after everything's graded, you know, where it came from. Before it gets judged, we can't see, but afterwards. So we were just like, where did this honey come from? And so we talked with the beekeeper and we talked with their neighbor because their honeys had such a completely different taste, and determined that it was probably the water source. The neighbor with the funny tasting honey had a sulfur spring, and that was probably where the bees were getting their water versus going to a spring or a water trough or something that had fresher water in it.
It's interesting. I mean, it's,
wow.
Cool. I never would have thought as much about the water source, but it kind of makes sense, especially with sulfur because it's so diffuse. I mean, you have a little bit of that, and you find a lot of sulfur water in especially eastern regions of the state. That's very common.
Well, and bees need what we would say would be dirty water. So if, for example, have you ever like, it's rained, you're walking down a path that has like tractor tires and there's all these little yellow butterflies that are flying around. You see this in Kentucky all the time. Those butterflies are there because they're looking for the salts that those puddles of water in those tractor tires is kind of leaching out. And honeybees are the same way. They need those different minerals from their water sources to kind of add in with the other nutrients that they're getting. So oftentimes they won't go to like the clean source of water. They're looking for something that's a little dirtier.
There you go. Butterflies and puddles.
That's awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, do you have any good bee jokes?
Oh, I am the worst at jokes.
Are you good at laughing at them?
I can laugh at jokes.
Well, that sounds like you're very good at them.
I mean,
it's about the joy. Well, I got a couple that I
say, until you go to a bee
to-
conference and there's just all these bee puns that people try and they land flat every time.
Oh, that sounds like heaven.
It's painful. After 3 or 4 days, you're just like, I can't.
Saying something that's kind of funny
close.
and then people not laughing is one of my all-time favorite feelings. It happens to me a lot, but
It's great. Just kind of
on
throw
this
that out
podcast.
there.
What do you call a wasp? A wannabe.
Oh,
Oh.
yeah.
This is for a former teacher, a
brand.
former professor, teacher. What do you give a bee on the first day of class? A syllabus.
Oh, okay.
And how do
have to laugh.
bees style their hair? With a honeycomb.
Mm.
Oh, see, I was waiting for buzz cut.
Oh, see,
okay.
she's turning. The wheels are turning now. So you're feeding this.
There you have it.
Yeah, food for thought.
I would imagine that both the personality of the beekeepers that I know combined with the low hanging fruit, that there would be a high density of puns in those interactions.
I bet that bee clubs are just like beehives, that there's no two exactly the same. I mean, and the ones that I've worked with over the years in a different county, you go from one county to the next and they each have their own personalities, but it's I bet you work with some interesting people. Definitely, I know you work with passionate people in beekeeping for sure.
Yeah. Yes, and that is, I think, probably one of the most rewarding parts about working with beekeepers. I make a joke at the beginning. See, I can be kind of funny, maybe. We'll see if you guys think it's funny.
You uncovered
I am on the edge of my seat.
At the beginning of a lot of my talks, that this is why I quit teaching higher education, because kids just in college classes are not interested in the topics you're teaching. But you come into a room of beekeepers and they are excited to learn. They're excited to share their knowledge. They want to be there. And so that is really rewarding. So no matter what clubs I've been to, it's been a lot more exciting, especially than teaching college classes.
I like that.
Imagine.
I got one more that's a good one.
Brett's not going to stop. He started.
Why couldn't the bee go to the dance? It's a sad story. It was a mothball.
Oh, gosh. Is that a naphthalene joke? It is, isn't it? We can appreciate that, though. All bee puns aside.
I can tell you something funny that has relation to bees, but we were talking about the different types of bees, right? You say like the Italian bees or the South African bees. Make sure if you're talking about these in public, you keep saying the word bees, because when someone particularly, let's just say it's an older woman, for example, and when she's talking about those damn Russians in public, you're like, the bees. We have to make sure that she's
Alexis, you're not an older woman.
Yes, that was you, wasn't it?
No, but
was
Jessica knows exactly who
I know exactly who you're talking about right now, because I can.
It's extra funny when it's coming out of like a 70-year-old woman's mouth and she's going, "Those damn Russians," because they sting like they're very aggressive. And
got a bit of an attitude sometimes.
Italians,
yeah.
So
her Italians don't go after her like that.
Yeah. I have also gotten stung by her damn Russian bees. So, well, I just wanted to throw out there, we were talking about the, things that you could do to help the bees. We do have an episode on pollinator gardens that you can go back and listen to if you've not already. And so that is from March 10th of 2024. That is season 2, episode 10. I like being able to say we have seasons. So,
I like
season 2, episode 10. But if you are interested in being like, Amanda, you've inspired me to do the plant things for the bees and not necessarily be a beekeeper, that is an episode that might be behooving of you. So Amanda, where can they find you, what you're doing, if they want to get involved? Like, give us the down low on that.
Yeah, so I'm in the state vet's office at Kentucky Department of Agriculture. But I, like I mentioned earlier, cover all of the different counties, so I'm kind of everywhere all at the same time. So the easiest way to get a hold of me is to either email me or call me. But I do site visits all across the state. I visit bee clubs all across the state. And this year we started hosting what we're calling State Apiarist office hours, which is a monthly Zoom meeting on the fourth Tuesdays, where I kind of just go through what we're seeing at a state level for bees, anything beekeepers should be aware of, any big announcements for things like bee schools or conferences. And then I also do some Q&A. So if people have questions, I will prepare material to go over those questions and share resources along those lines. So I try to be as accessible as possible.
Where can they find like links for that? Are you posting that on a Facebook page or just the KDA website, or where could they find it?
So the easiest way would be to reach out to me through email. The way that state government works, I'm not allowed to have social media. So I have to rely on the beekeepers to get the information out.
Sure.
So my information is pretty easy to find if you go to the Kentucky Department of Agriculture State Apiary Program website. And then I can connect folks with the different resources. Information is also available at the Kentucky State Beekeepers Association website as well. They have a calendar with events on it, and they post the monthly meeting.
Super cool. Awesome. Well, any other final bee jokes out there from you people?
Just a reminder to all of our audience to be yourself and believe in yourself. Believe in yourself.
Believe.
Well,
nothing more before we go.
Well, if you enjoy bee jokes, leave us a review on this podcast with hopefully 5 stars because of how great those bee jokes are, and you can tell us which one you like or share one of your own on there. It'll help other beekeepers.
Or if you can't choose, if they're all so good that you can't choose.
That's obviously the case for everybody, but we would appreciate that. You can also find us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can shoot us a message on there or check out the email in the show notes if you've got any questions or suggestions for episodes or suggestions for future bad dad jokes on other episodes. Feel free to send those our way. But we appreciate you all being here today, and we hope you keep listening and that you will catch us here next time. Have a great one.